think that we've talked on the phone before, but we've never been face
I
to
know.
face.
So nice to seeing you.
Yes, indeed.
I'm sitting now in my studio at Peabody. I have a break, so it's perfect.
Oh, okay.
Having my coffee, so.
Yeah. Well, I should let people know who you are, right? You are cellist Amit Peled, and you have appeared many times, both in recordings and as well as conversations that we've done in the past here on FM 91. And you also played, I guess it's been a year. It doesn't seem like a year, but we all lost, a couple of years. A year ago, in April of 2021, you played with the Lima Symphony, which is also in our listening area.
Yeah.
And that was Dvorak, right?
It was Dvorak, and I actually loved going there, and they have this historic burger place in Lima.
Yeah.
And that was probably the best burger I've ever heard in my life. So
that's one of the first questions that everybody who goes to Lima gets asked if they've had that Kewpie burger, I think it's called Kewpie burger.
I mean, it was phenomenal, I have to say.
Okay, well, now that we're both thinking about lunch.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about this CD, which I've got right here. It has a Latin title. I'm going to ask you to explain it and explain what the story is behind this album.
So this album, Solus et Una, means alone and together. And it's basically a mirror of how I felt during the pandemic. I felt alone and together, and it was, musically speaking, I was very much together with my family the whole time, and I'm thankful for that. But alone and together means that I was alone with a cello most of the time, like many other artists. I started communicating with the world through Zoom, but mainly I played for myself in my practice room. And I found that I'm connected to Bach more than ever before, not just to Bach, but to the way I grew up on playing Bach, which I don't want to say in a romantic way, but in an emotional way. These days we played and we know more historically about it and what not to do, basically. Don't vibrate, don't do this, don't do that. I felt very free to do whatever I want. And that led me to play it in a different way. And I felt more and more ready to record the second half of the cycles, the 4, 5, and 6. But as the pandemic progressed and I was about to record the Swiss suites, I started communicating more with my students here at Peabody, and we have established a residency that we did in Montana. We called it a cello bubble because it was like the NBA bubble. We couldn't be together without the masks and the of course the vaccine and all of that. But I did want to create a situation where we feel free like before. So we found this place, gorgeous place, and we found a donor that's basically sponsored it, and we stayed there for 10 days and we did tests going in during the stay, and we made sure that we are all safe. But while we were there, we were completely free like the old days, and we made music like the old days, people to people. And we asked a friend of mine to write an arrangement of the Brahms Symphony, because I really wanted all of us to play something very juicy, very romantic, very beautiful. And we arranged the Brahms Third Symphony, one of the movements, for cello gang, for the group. And the combination of recording the Bach, being with myself, going back to the roots of who I am as a cellist, and at the same time being able to communicate with my students in such a free and intimate and deep way, that led to this CD, basically. The plan was to record all 3 last suites, because I did the first 3. But after recording the Brahms there in Montana and having 4 and 5, I looked at myself and I felt alone and together. And I thought, well, to title a CD Alone and Together in English sounds lame. I'm sorry. So I Googled it. And that's what came up. And it sounded very artistic, and I felt good about it. And then that led me to the decision of how to conclude this cycle, which will be recording the 6th suite alone, like everybody else, but then to write an arrangement for the cello gang to play this suite as a symphony with 8 cellos. So it's actually, I let my feeling lead me through the pandemic, and that's a result. Solus et una.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things I want to mention. I mean, the sound of your cello in these suites is so full and rich. I mean, it's just wonderful. There's a lot of space in there that really lets it resonate when you listen to it. Really wonderful recording, and wonderfully, I'm digressing here a little bit, wonderfully recorded. You know, so many cellists have done their own version of the Bach cello suites, and they are just a part of the equation. The other part is where they record it, what the sonic profile is of where they are. And yours is very clean, which is a nice compliment to the richness of the cello sound.
Yeah.
Was that
I want to talk about that too, because that relates to the title as well. I mean, there are two layers here of alone and together, playing alone and playing together. But what you just said is exactly how I feel about making CDs. It's a dialogue. And going into recording, especially Bach, you need to have somebody that you fully trust. And I'm so happy that you mentioned this. This recording was done with Dahon Sito, who is, I think he won by now 6 Grammys for his recordings. He's nothing short of being a genius. I mean, I'm not kidding. And we spent 3 days together that were transformative, I should say, for me as a musician, because he's not just a great engineer. He's an amazing violinist, he's an amazing musician. And the back and forth between us was, well, maybe for somebody it could look like a fight, but it was really a dialogue. And I see him an equal partner of this recording. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because it is a dialogue between the engineer and the artist. And I hope I can afford him more, but he's just an amazing genius. And it was a great lesson, simply a lesson for me.
Yeah, well, it absolutely shows on the album itself. I also wanted to mention this Brahms symphony arrangement. I had wondered if that was made specifically for your group, because I had never heard of it before, but it's so effective. And that second movement is so, heart-wrenching. It's an interesting way to leave the album, right? What statement is sort of being made with that?
The statement is, the alone and together, that I do feel the connection to my students as strong as my connection to cello playing. And it leads, I see the 6th suite as a cycle. And when I did the first 3 with a Pablo Casals cello, I felt that it was the right time to record, and I was privileged to have that cello. I didn't feel ready to embark on 4, 5, and 6 on that instrument. I did not feel a deep connection to that cello physically, but with the Grancino that I have now, I felt that the sound of it is just me, much more. It's like hot chocolate. And I feel so surrounded by it. I don't know how to explain in words, but it's me, it's my voice. And I felt ready to do the recording. And then with my students, who are really my flesh and blood musically, to conclude this CD with the Brahms, I thought a lot about it. And as I mentioned before, the fact that I'm going to do the 6th with the cello gang playing an ensemble that we will write for that suite is a way for me to sort of conclude the cycle by saying, yes, it's for cello solo, but what one learns through life experience of playing these suites is, what is your call? At least for me. And my call, I feel, as a cellist, as a musician, is to leave something for people. And to leave something is not just a nice phrase, it's to shape them as musicians. And I feel strongly that my teaching can do that more than my playing, or as much, I would say. You really change life by teaching somebody for 4 years, taking them on stage, making a recording with them, shaping their sound, their thoughts. They go out, they get married, they get kids, they get their own students. You shape their life, literally. And I just have a student that got accepted to Peabody, where I teach, who is from Norway, and she's 17 years old. She is a student of one of my first students here. I've been teaching for 18 years at Peabody, and one of my first undergrad from Spain went to live in Norway, and she's now the co-principal of the Opera House in Oslo. And that's her student. And how wonderful of a cycle it is for me to see that student, to hear how she plays, how she approached the instrument, so similar to her cello grandfather, which is me. And all of that mishmash of emotions and sort of connections, I wanted to put it on a CD. We did once a CD of a cello gang. It was entirely a cello gang CD, but I felt that Bach and cello gang, this alone and together, during the pandemic, it felt right to me, and especially to conclude the cycle with a sixth, with a D major suite, and then having that suite played with 8 cellos to conclude the cycle. Maybe it's also showing to the future cellists that these suites, as you mentioned, there's so many recordings. Yes, it's important to put your own stamp on it, but it's also important to maybe take it to the next step. So all of that together is how I felt, and it felt right to do that.
How did you stay in touch with your students during the pandemic, during lockdown? I mean, did you do a lot of Zooming with folks?
Yeah. So the first year was entirely on Zoom, and it was even illegal through Johns Hopkins to see each other. But I have to say that Peabody was one of the first music institutions to go back. So last January, we already went back with a lot of measurements. We had to do the test twice a week. That was even before we got the vaccine. And we gave an option to the students. We gave them an option to either stay on Zoom or to come back and have lessons, of course, with masks and all that. And most of I have 16 students, and 14 of them came back. So I was one of the first ones to come back here to the institution and to teach in person. And I kept going on Zoom with the other 2, and I do online classes until today on Zoom. So it did change the whole perspective of how you communicate with colleagues online. However, I must say that the in-person experience is nothing compared to anything else. And that bubble where we recorded the Brahms was so special to feel that again, that you have a lesson, you hear the sound, you talk about colors, you talk about dynamics that Zoom cannot really bring out. So Zoom was very good for technique, for being able to show things more than to actually hear things. And that's an important component of learning an instrument, to see how the hands should look like. But the actual hearing, you can't really match one-on-one in a room or in a hall where dynamics and colors are getting into account. And that's the beauty of what we do.
Yeah. I've read some interesting interviews with you where you talk about the teaching process and the learning process, and the idea that you ask a student to kind of immerse themselves, to bring in 10 different points, surrounding the piece of music that they're performing with. I have studied for a long time as a musician, as a singer. Nobody ever said that sort of thing to me, and I wish they had, because it's so interesting and so valid, this idea, for example, of the Elgar Concerto, and thinking of what you would wear as a Victorian English person at the time this was written.
Well, thank you for mentioning it. And it's funny because just today, this morning, I had a student playing the Elgar. And of course, it says Nobilemente in the beginning. And she comes from Taiwan, and she's a freshman, very excited, very good cellist, but she plays it like a wild horse. Not that, but that's not what he wanted. So I asked her about it, and of course the 10 points and what do you know, and the story. And eventually I keep on my iPhone, I keep a photo of Elgar himself wearing a 5-piece suit. Just gorgeous photo of him, very noble. So I asked her, I showed her the photo and I asked her, do you know who it is? And she said, no. And I said, that's Elgar. Just look at it for 10 seconds. Observe this noble man, and then start the beginning. And it's amazing, the change. But of course, what you need to teach them is to be curious themselves, to actually come up. So the 10 points is, it took me years to find out that they don't need to come up with a knowledge that you want to implant on them in music history lesson. You need to ignite their curiosity. And the way to do it, at least for me, is to create their own interest in it. Each one of us, some people are interested. Was he gay? Was he straight? Okay, fine. Some people are interested, what city did he live in? How did it look like? Some people are interested in how many kids he had. Every point in the story can lead to ignition of your imagination. And I love it because I learn all the time new things about pieces because they are interested in different angles of it. And it all comes back, after when you're curious, you learn what needs to be learned about the piece, of course, but you add that extra personality of what you are interested in. And I find that that's the only way, because if I force them, if I give them the information and force them to memorize it, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know that Peabody has a great opera program, so I hope that they let you kind of cross-pollinate sometimes and bring those ideas to those students.
Well, I cannot. My own students have to take 1 semester of voice lessons because I see it as a mandatory, crucial part of being a cellist. Is to understand how to breathe, how to stand, how to use your weight. Like, for instance, one of the things I teach them is that you don't reach a high note with your eyebrows as a singer. And, you don't do that.
Right.
You actually plan down your weight. And that's one of the basic things we need to learn as cellists. There's so many similarities. So they have to take 1 semester at least to understand breathing, to understand how the voice works, where to breathe, how to do all of that. So some of them, actually one student I failed as a cellist because he became a singer after doing but I feel very proud of him. He's a great tenor now.
Yeah, he went over to the dark side, right?
Yeah.
Well, the album is called Solus et Una. I've got it right here. Cellist Amit Peled. Thank you so much for talking about this. So fascinating. I mean, the recording itself is a sort of a masterclass from you in how to bring all of these things together and to create great music in the face of difficult times that we went through during the pandemic. So my best to you, my thanks to you, and thank you for this beautiful music.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.